My name is Kiana Huff. I'm 32 years old, and I'm a captain in the United States Army. 7 years ago, on the night of my 25th birthday, my life changed forever. My stepfather, Frank, the man who had cast a shadow of fear over my family for more than a decade, broke down the door to my apartment in a drunken rage. And as his brute strength dislocated my shoulder, sending me crashing to the floor, my mother just stood there and watched. Before I share how that horrific night became the catalyst for my life's greatest mission, let me know where you're listening from. And please, give this story a like and hit that follow button if you want to hear more stories about turning pain into purpose. My childhood was peaceful until I was 8. That's when my biological father, a decorated veteran, lost his battle with cancer, leaving my mom and me to figure things out on our own. For 4 years, my mother, Diane, worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat. Exhausted as she was, she still made our small apartment a home. Our bond was forged in that struggle. Everything changed when I was 12 and my mom met Frank. He was a bank executive, charming, successful, and what seemed like our savior. The first time he came to our home, he brought me a model of a fighter jet. He looked me right in the eye and said something I would only later recognize as a perfectly calculated lie. Frank entered our lives like a change in the weather. He swept my mother and me out of our cramped Dorchester apartment and into a sprawling, immaculate house in Chestnut Hill. I remember being completely overwhelmed by the sheer size of the rooms, the gleaming hardwood floors, and a backyard that seemed to stretch on forever to my 12-year-old eyes. For the first time in years, my mom was able to quit her second job. She started to smile more, a genuine, rested kind of smile, and seeing that made me feel a deep sense of gratitude toward Frank. He bought me books. He took us out for fancy dinners in the North End on weekends, serving up plates of pasta and praise with equal generosity. He was meticulously building the image of the perfect father, the strong and stable pillar our little family needed. In the beginning, I believed it. I was desperate to believe it for my mother's sake. But even then, some small, quiet part of me felt a subtle wrongness, a cold draft in the warm air, as if we were living in a perfectly staged play and I was the only one who could see the edges of the set. Frank was a master of the conditional gift, the kind of generosity that always came with a price tag you couldn't see. For my 15th birthday, he presented me with my first laptop, a sleek, silver machine. "So you can excel in your studies," he'd said, beaming as I unwrapped it. But the gift soon revealed its true purpose. A week later, the questions started. "Who are you talking to online, Kiana? Why are you up so late? I saw the light on under your door." The laptop wasn't a tool for learning, it was a tool for surveillance. When I turned 16, he upped the ante. He handed me a supplementary credit card with my name on it. "It's time you learned about financial responsibility," he announced, his voice full of paternal pride. But that card wasn't about teaching me responsibility, it was about absolute control. Once a month, every month, he would sit me down at the large mahogany dining table, and we would review my statement. His finger would trace down the list of charges, pausing to interrogate every minor expense. "A coffee from Starbucks? Did you really need that, Kiana? You went to the movies twice this month? Seems a bit excessive." It wasn't a lesson in finance. It was a lesson in control. He was teaching me that every dollar I spent was a dollar he could question, that every move I made was a move he was watching. Each gift was another invisible chain, pulled a little tighter each time. But the most frightening thing was watching the invisible walls go up around my mother. Frank built them slowly, brick by insidious brick, so gradually that she never even noticed she was being imprisoned. It started with her friends. After a coffee date she'd had with her best friend Linda, he'd casually remark, "You know, Linda seems a little jealous of your happiness, honey. Did you notice the way she looked at your new coat?" Soon my mother started seeing Linda less. Then it was her family. After a Thanksgiving dinner with her siblings, he'd sigh and say, "Your brother and sister, they just don't seem to really need us, do they? They have their own lives." Before I knew it, our beautiful, sprawling house had become an island. My mother, once a vibrant woman with a rich network of friends and family, now had only Frank. He had successfully become her entire world, a world he could manipulate and control at will. I tried to talk to her about it once, gently pointing out how isolated she'd become, but she just waved it away. "Oh, honey," she'd said with a strained smile. "Frank only wants what's best for us." The first time the monster truly showed his face was on a Tuesday evening when I was 17. I received my acceptance letter from the United States Military Academy at West Point. I flew down the stairs, the thick envelope clutched in my hand, my heart exploding with a joy so pure it felt like it could lift me off the ground. My mom saw the look on my face and immediately understood. She wrapped me in a fierce hug, tears of pride streaming down her cheeks. Frank was sitting in his leather armchair, reading the Wall Street Journal. He looked up, first at the letter, then at me. His smile never reached his eyes. "It's fine," he said, his voice a flat, cold tone that cut through all the warmth in the room. "But don't get your hopes up. They only accept kids like you to meet a quota." It was a slap in the face, a single sentence designed to gut me. He hadn't just dismissed my achievement, he had attacked my dream, my worth, my very identity. That night, lying in my bed, staring into the darkness of my perfectly decorated room, I finally understood the horrifying truth. Frank didn't love me. Frank didn't even like me. He hated anything he couldn't control, and my dream, a dream inspired by my real father, was something he could never own. But how could my mother not see it? How could she stand there, watch him poison the proudest moment of my life, and say nothing? How could she not see the vast empty space between the man he was and the memory of the father I lost? My father, Sergeant Robert Huff, didn't leave me stocks or a trust fund. He left me a worn wooden cigar box. It wasn't much to look at, but inside it held his entire legacy. There was the deep purple ribbon and bronze heart of his Purple Heart medal, a few faded black and white photographs of him in Vietnam, his face young and impossibly serious beneath his helmet, and a stack of letters tied with a string that he had written to my mom. The paper was thin, almost translucent with age. As a little girl, I would carefully take them out, tracing the outline of his face in the photos, trying to hear his voice in the looping cursive of his handwriting. My mom would tell me stories about him, about his courage, his unwavering integrity, his deep and quiet love for his country. For me, the Army wasn't some abstract concept on the news. It was woven into my DNA. It was my way of connecting with the father I had lost too soon. That box was my most prized possession. It was more than just a collection of old things. It was a compass, a constant reminder of the person I wanted to grow up to be. It was the inheritance of his honor. After Frank arrived, that changed. He hated the box. He couldn't stand the sight of it. "You're always clinging to the past," he'd mutter under his breath whenever he saw me with it. His need for control, once a subtle undercurrent, was becoming more and more obvious. The air in our beautiful house grew heavy, thick with unspoken rules and simmering resentment. One evening when I was 16, I heard them arguing downstairs. Their voices were muffled, but the anger was sharp. Then I heard a loud slam, followed by a dead, chilling silence. The next morning, my mother wore sunglasses inside the house. She said she'd bumped into a door, her voice brittle and overly casual. But when she turned to get a glass of water, the light from the kitchen window caught her just right. I saw it. A sickening mottled bruise spreading across her temple, hidden just beneath her hairline. My heart stopped. The cold dread that had been a whisper inside me was now a scream. The violence was no longer just emotional, it was physical. I confronted her later that day, my voice shaking with a mixture of fear and rage. "Mom, it was Frank, wasn't it?" She just shook her head, her eyes pleading with me from behind the dark lenses. "Please, Kiana, don't make a big deal out of this," she whispered, her hand trembling as she reached out to touch my arm. "I can handle it." The feeling of helplessness was so intense it felt like I was burning from the inside out. I was the daughter of a soldier, a man who fought for others, and I couldn't even protect my own mother in her own home. Frank's cruelty finally reached its peak on a bright, cloudless Saturday morning. He decided it was time to clean out the garage. I was up in my room, trying to study, when I heard a series of loud, crashing noises from below. I ran downstairs and out to the garage, my heart pounding in my chest. And there it was. My father's wooden box lying splintered and open on top of a pile of trash bags and old newspapers, its sacred contents spilling out like a wound. Frank stood there, wiping dust from his hands onto his expensive jeans. "This pile of junk was just taking up space," he said, his voice casual, dismissive. He didn't even bother to look at me. "It's time to live in the present, Kiana." I just stood there, frozen. I couldn't breathe. He hadn't just thrown away some old things. He was trying to erase my father. He was trying to erase my past, my identity, the very foundation of who I was. He was throwing me away. That night, long after the house was dark and quiet, after I was sure he was asleep, I snuck out. The cold night air hit my face as I lifted the heavy lid of the garbage bin at the curb. The stench of rotting food and damp cardboard filled my lungs. Tears streamed down my face, mixing with the dirt and grime on my hands as I frantically, carefully dug through the filth. I rescued every last piece, the metal, the photos, every single letter. As I clutched the salvaged treasures of my father's life to my chest, I made a vow. I swore to myself that I would get out. This would not be my life. Huddled in the darkness of the garage, holding that broken box, I made my final decision. The dream of joining the army was no longer just about honoring my father's legacy. It had become a battle plan. I wasn't just going to leave, I was going to become so strong that no one, ever again, could make me or anyone I loved feel so weak. I was going to build a life on a foundation of honor and truth, everything that Frank was not. I went back inside, quietly opened the laptop he had given me, and went online. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the force of a resolve so absolute it felt like steel solidifying in my veins. I found the online enlistment form for the U.S. Army. Frank thought he had thrown away my past, but he had no idea he had just ignited my future. The day I left, I didn't say goodbye. I was gone before the sun even hinted at the horizon, slipping out of the silent house at 5 a.m. The only sounds were the low hum of the sub-zero refrigerator and the frantic thumping of my own heart. I moved like a ghost through the home that had become my prison, my bare feet cold against the polished marble floors. Every floorboard threatened to creak, every shadow seemed to hold Frank's sleeping form. I left a small note on the granite kitchen counter, a hastily scribbled sentence on the back of a receipt. "I've gone to follow my own path." I didn't dare look toward the master bedroom. I couldn't risk seeing the sliver of light under my mother's door. I was terrified that one last glance, one moment of weakness, would shatter my resolve. On the Greyhound bus hurtling south on I-95, I watched the familiar skyline of Boston fade into a gray smudge against the dawn. With my duffel bag at my feet and the rescued box of my father's memories tucked safely inside, I leaned my head against the cool glass of the window. For the first time in 6 long years, I felt my shoulders, which had been permanently tensed up to my ears, begin to drop. I took a deep, shuddering breath. The air inside the bus was stale, smelling of disinfectant and cheap coffee. But to me, it was the sweet air of freedom. Every mile the bus traveled, every monotonous rumble of the tires was the sound of a chain snapping. I had no illusions about what was waiting for me at Fort Jackson, South Carolina. I knew it would be hard. But as I watched the sun rise over the highway, I knew with absolute certainty that it couldn't be worse than the perfectly decorated, soul-crushing hell I was leaving behind. Basic combat training is engineered to be a crucible. It's a 10-week, scientifically designed inferno meant to burn away your civilian self, to strip you down to the studs and see what's left. And I welcomed the fire. While others flinched, I leaned into it. The drill sergeants were relentless, their faces inches from mine, their voices raw from screaming that we were pathetic, a waste of taxpayer dollars, a disgrace to the uniform. They made us do push-ups in thick, sucking mud that seeped into every fiber of our clothes, the cold grit scraping our skin. We would run for miles under the blistering South Carolina sun, my lungs burning, the sting of sweat in my eyes, every muscle screaming in a unified chorus of agony. I saw plenty of recruits break down in tears of exhaustion and despair. I heard even more whispering about quitting, about going home. But for me, this place was a sanctuary. Every drop of sweat that poured down my face felt like it was washing away years of filth. Every searing ache in my muscles was a purification. This pain was clean. It was honest. It didn't sneak up on you with a backhanded compliment or a gift with strings attached. It wasn't the slow, toxic, manipulative pain that Frank specialized in. Here, the rules were brutally simple and beautifully clear. If you met the standard, you passed. If you fell behind, your squad was there, cursing and shouting to haul you back to your feet. On a forced march, when my legs felt like lead and my vision started to tunnel, a girl from Ohio, gasping for breath herself, nudged my arm and growled, "Come on, Huff, stay with me." And I did. For the first time, I was part of something where my worth was measured by my will, my effort, my refusal to quit, not by how silently I could endure being made to feel small. But the silence from home was a constant, heavy weight. In 10 weeks, we were granted one 10-minute phone call. I stood in a long, anxious line, listening to the joyful, tearful conversations around me. When it was my turn, my hands were slick with sweat. My mom answered on the second ring. Her hello was thin, tight, and I could immediately hear the tension. I heard the muffled sound of the TV in the background, and then Frank's voice, a low, irritated grumble. "Who is that? Who's on the phone, Diane?" My mother's voice dropped to a frantic whisper. "Kiana, I can't talk long." I tried to tell her I was okay, that it was hard, but I was making it. The seconds ticked by, each one an eternity. "I'm proud of you, honey." She finally managed to rush out, her voice cracking. Then, a click. She was gone. The call lasted less than 3 minutes. Mail call became a daily ritual of hope and disappointment. The drill sergeant would stand before the platoon, a stack of letters and packages in his hand. Names would be called out, followed by whoops of joy. I'd watch as others greedily tore open news from home, their faces softening as they read letters or looked at photos. My name was never called, not once. That profound loneliness was a constant ache, but it was also a clarifying force. It was proof that I had made the right choice. There was no safety net, no welcoming home waiting for me. This path was a one-way street. I had to build my own future, right here, with nothing but my own 2 hands. I had to succeed because I had absolutely no other option. Then, in the final week, with graduation just days away, the unthinkable happened. "Huff!" the drill sergeant barked during mail call. I was so stunned I didn't move. "Huff, you deaf?" he yelled. "Get up here!" It was a small, lumpy package wrapped in brown grocery bag paper, secured with masking tape. There was no return address. I took it back to my bunk, my heart hammering against my ribs. My hands fumbled as I tore it open. Inside, nestled in crumpled newspaper, was a single Hershey's milk chocolate bar. And beneath it, a small folded cocktail napkin. I unfolded it carefully, scrawled in my mother's familiar, elegant handwriting, though a little shakier than I remembered, were 3 simple words. "Be strong, sweetie." That was it. Just 3 words. But they were everything. It was her small, silent act of defiance. A message smuggled out from behind enemy lines. It was a flare sent up in the darkness, telling me that despite the silence, she was still in there. She was thinking of me. She still loved me. Standing there, under the dim, institutional yellow light of the barracks, the floodgates broke. I cried for the first time since I'd left. Deep, gut-wrenching sobs that shook my whole body, releasing 10 weeks of loneliness and fear and pain. That piece of chocolate, in that moment, was the sweetest thing I'd ever tasted. It was more than a candy bar. It was proof. It was love. It was the fuel I desperately needed to take those final steps toward graduation and into the rest of my life. After basic training, I was stationed at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And it was there, in the sprawling heart of the airborne, that I finally found a family. It wasn't the picture-perfect family you see on TV, gathered around a flawless Thanksgiving dinner. My family was forged in the late-night scent of gun oil, the shared complaints about the rubbery eggs in the chow hall, and the quiet moments after a long field exercise, cleaning our weapons in silence until one of us would finally crack a joke. It was a motley crew of soldiers from every corner of the country. A farm boy from Iowa, a wisecracking kid from the Bronx, a quiet girl from California. All of us running from something and toward something else. We argued like siblings over the last clean Humvee or who pulled the worst guard shifts. But if one of us was struggling, the entire platoon closed ranks. When I got my first promotion to specialist, there was no fancy dinner, no expensive gift in a velvet box. Instead, my squad chipped in a few dollars each and surprised me in the barracks with 2 large pepperoni pizzas and a case of cheap soda. We sat on our bunks, eating greasy pizza off paper towels and talking trash. It was a simple, small gesture. But sitting there, in that circle of genuine warmth, I felt a sense of belonging so profound it brought a lump to my throat. It meant more to me than every single calculated conditional gift Frank had ever given. This was real. My company commander was Captain Eva Rostova. She was a formidable woman of Russian descent with icy blue eyes and a reputation for not wasting a single word. In the beginning, I was terrified of her. She had a way of looking at you that felt like she was conducting a full diagnostic of your character flaws. But she also had this uncanny ability to see straight through the armor people wore. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling field exercise that had left everyone exhausted and irritable, she called me into her office. I walked in expecting a reprimand, my mind racing through everything I might have done wrong. She didn't tell me to sit. She just walked over to a small fridge, pulled out a cold bottle of water, and handed it to me. "Huff," she said, her voice direct but not unkind. "You're a damn good soldier, one of the best I have. But you carry too much on your own." She paused, her gaze steady. "Remember, even the strongest soldiers need covering fire." She didn't ask about my past. She didn't pry or demand an explanation. She simply let me know that she saw it, the weight I was carrying, and that she was there. It was the first time in my life that someone in a position of authority hadn't used their power to control or diminish me, but to lift me up. I met Eric in the most unromantic place imaginable, the waiting room of the on-base dental clinic, surrounded by the whine of drills and the smell of antiseptic. He was an officer, too, a captain in the social work division. We started talking, just the usual small talk about how long we'd been waiting, which quickly evolved into something deeper. He had this incredible sense of calm about him, and he was a genuine listener. When I spoke, I could tell he wasn't just waiting for his turn to talk. He was actually hearing me. He never tried to fix me. He didn't offer easy solutions or tired platitudes. He just created a safe space where, for the first time, I felt I could just be myself, scars and all. He told me about the soldiers he worked with, men and women battling invisible wounds, the kind you couldn't see, but that were every bit as devastating as a physical injury. Through him, through his quiet and steady empathy, I began to understand a crucial truth. Admitting you're hurt isn't a sign of weakness. It's the first, most courageous step toward healing. It was Eric who gently pushed me to do more than just survive. "Silence is a form of consent, Kiana," he told me one day as we walked around the base. "Your mom is in a war of her own. She needs to know there's a way out." His words hit me hard. Buoyed by his support and by the newfound strength I was building, I finally gathered the courage to act. I made a difficult call home to my mom when I knew Frank would be at work. I didn't push or demand. I just told her I loved her. And then I mailed her a discreet package with brochures and contact information for a women's shelter in Boston, one of the best in the state. A few days later, my phone rang with an unknown number. I answered, and a voice hissed on the other end, a voice I knew all too well, dripping with venom. It was Frank. He had found the brochures. "Who the hell do you think you are?" he snarled, his voice a low, menacing growl. "Are you trying to destroy my family, you ungrateful little brat? That uniform doesn't make you better than anyone. You better not ever show your face in this house again." The line went dead. I stood there, phone in my hand, the warmth of the last few months instantly frozen over by the icy chill of his hatred. The call extinguished any flickering hope I had that things could ever change peacefully. It was a declaration of war. And it was a chilling reminder that no matter how far I ran, the battle for my own home front was far from over. I told Captain Rostova what happened. She just nodded, her gaze sharp and knowing. "The ghosts of the past have a way of finding us, Huff," she said, her voice low. "Don't let them win." After Frank's threatening phone call, I tried to build a fortress of silence. I didn't reach out, and I hoped, naively, that the distance would be enough of a shield. But I had underestimated him. Frank was a master strategist, and he knew my defenses had a fatal weakness. That weakness was my mother. He couldn't get through my walls, so he used her as his weapon to tunnel under them. The phone calls started. It was always my mother who called, and it was always late at night, long after Frank was asleep, when she could speak without being overheard. Her voice on the other end was never calm. It was a hushed, frantic whisper, laced with a familiar panic. "Kiana, please, just stop making him angry," she would plead, her words tumbling out in a rush. "He's under so much stress at work. You just need to be a little softer." She never once asked how I was doing. She never asked if I was okay. Her only concern was managing Frank's temper. And in those late-night calls, I was forced to face a devastating new reality. My mother was no longer my ally. She had become the spokeswoman for her own captor. Every whispered plea from her felt like a knife, twisting in a wound I was desperately trying to heal. Frank had launched a new campaign, one of insidious psychological warfare. He no longer attacked me directly. Instead, he repositioned himself as the victim. The narrative, as told by my mother, was that he was the one who was suffering. She'd call and tell me how Frank had been having sleepless nights, worrying about me, how I had broken his heart with my ingratitude. He was painting a masterpiece of manipulation, and my mother was delivering it to me, frame and all. The campaign reached its peak a week before Frank's birthday. My phone rang, and I could hear the manufactured sobs on the other end before she even said my name. "Please, Kiana, I'm begging you," she cried, her voice thick with tears. "Just call him. Just call and wish him a happy birthday. That's all I'm asking. One phone call so we can have some peace in this family." There was a pause, and then came the final crushing blow. "You owe him that much, honey. He's given us everything." A suffocating wave of guilt washed over me. It was thick and heavy, making it hard to breathe. I had faced down drill sergeants, pushed my body to its absolute limit, and committed myself to a life of service and discipline. I knew how to fight an enemy I could see. But I had no idea how to fight against my own mother's tears. I finally broke down and told Eric everything. I laid out the whole twisted saga, the late-night calls, the guilt trips, the demand for a birthday phone call. He listened patiently in his quiet, unassuming way, letting the whole story spill out without interruption. When I was finished, he looked at me and said the words that would change everything. "Kiana," he said gently, "what Frank is doing to you, it has a name. It's called gaslighting. He's deliberately manipulating you to the point where you question your own reality, your own sanity." He continued, "And he's using your mother as a flying monkey. It's a term for when a narcissist uses a third person to carry out their psychological attacks for them." He explained it was a classic textbook tactic of narcissistic abusers. For the first time, I could put a name to the demon I was fighting. This wasn't just random cruelty or a bad temper. It was a calculated, vicious strategy. And knowing that I wasn't going crazy, was both terrifying and incredibly liberating. I wasn't losing my mind. I was being attacked. A few weeks before my 25th birthday, the final call came. My mother's voice was different this time. The pleading was gone, replaced by a strange, almost rehearsed firmness. "Kiana," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Frank and I are driving down to your apartment this weekend. We need to talk, as a family." A chill went down my spine. This wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. Frank was done sending his messenger to beg. Now, he was sending her to deliver an ultimatum. I knew, with every fiber of my being, that it was a trap. "Mom, I don't think that's a good idea," I managed to say, my own voice barely a whisper. The line was silent for a moment, and then she delivered the final, fatal blow. The one sentence she knew I couldn't defend against. "If you truly love me, Kiana," she said, her voice suddenly cold and clear, "you won't say no." If you've ever been put in a position like that, where your love for someone was used as leverage against you, I'm asking you to please give this story a like. It would mean the world to know I'm not alone. And in the comments, just type the words, "I understand." Because sometimes that's all we need to hear. There was nothing left to say. He had won. He had taken the purest thing I had, my love for my mother, and twisted it into a weapon to be used against me. I didn't hang up. I just ended the call, the silence on the line feeling heavier than any of her words. I tossed the phone onto my bed, the small thud echoing the final collapse of my defenses. The ghosts of the past weren't just finding me, they were coming to break down my door. That night, the night of my 25th birthday, I prepared for a psychological battle, not a physical assault. My apartment was spotless, my military awards hung perfectly straight on the wall, everything in its place as if I were preparing for a barracks inspection. I rehearsed my lines in my head, reminding myself to remain calm, professional, detached. Stay in control, Huff. Don't let him get to you. I was ready for a war of words, but the moment I opened the door, I knew my preparations were useless. The man standing in my hallway was not the calculating manipulator I had prepared for. This was a different beast. Frank was drunk, his face flushed, his expensive suit rumpled. His eyes were bloodshot, swimming in a directionless rage. Behind him, my mother stood like a ghost, her face pale and drawn with terror. "We need to talk," Frank growled, the words slurring together as he shoved past me, shouldering me aside to barge into my home. The acrid smell of expensive whiskey filled my small living room, thick and suffocating. This wasn't a conversation. This was an invasion. He started pacing my apartment like a caged animal, his heavy footsteps thudding on the floor. He began with a litany of insults, his voice getting louder with every word. He sneered at my furniture, my books, my life. His eyes landed on the wall where my awards were displayed, my commendation medals, my marksmanship badges. He jabbed a finger toward them. "This is all just a joke," he spat. "A pathetic little fantasy." My training kicked in. De-escalate, maintain a non-threatening posture, use a calm tone. "Frank, you're drunk," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Maybe we should do this in the morning." It was like throwing gasoline on a fire. His head snapped toward me. "You dare lecture me!" he roared, and then he lunged. In that split second, the soldier took over. My body reacted before my mind could process it. I dropped into a defensive stance, raising my arms to protect myself. But this wasn't a training mat at Bragg. This was the cramped space between my couch and my coffee table. And my opponent wasn't a fellow soldier. He was a man 50 pounds heavier, fueled by alcohol and years of suppressed rage, a man who had completely lost control. The struggle was brutal and blessedly short. He was a storm of raw, clumsy force. He grabbed me, his fingers digging into my arms like vices, and slammed me back against the wall. The impact knocked the wind out of me, the back of my head cracking against the drywall. I fought back, trying to break his grip, trying to create distance, but he was too strong. He got a hold of my left arm, and then he twisted it. There was a sound, a dry, sickening pop that seemed to suck all the air out of the room. It was followed by a bolt of white-hot, blinding agony that shot from my shoulder down to my fingertips. My legs gave out. I crumpled to the floor in a heap. Through a blur of pain-induced tears, I looked up. And I saw my mother. She was standing in the doorway, exactly where she had been when they arrived. Her hands were pressed to her mouth, her face a mask of paralyzed horror. Her eyes were wide, fixed on me. She didn't move. She didn't scream. She didn't do anything. She just stood there and watched. In that moment, her silence was more violent than his attack. Her stillness was more painful than my dislocated shoulder. It was the final, devastating confirmation. I was utterly and completely alone. Frank stood over me, his chest heaving, sucking in ragged breaths. He looked down at me on the floor, a twisted, triumphant smirk on his face. He leaned down, his hot, sour breath washing over my cheek. "See?" he whispered, his voice a low, satisfied hiss. "You're nothing without that uniform, just as weak as your father was." That was his mistake. That one sentence. The pain, the shock, the betrayal. It all coalesced into something else, something cold and hard and clear. It was a rage so pure it felt like ice in my veins. My mission objective suddenly became crystal clear. Survive, document, report. With my good arm, my right arm, I reached for my cell phone, which had clattered to the floor near my head. I didn't have to look. My thumb, guided by pure muscle memory, found the button on the side and pressed it 3 times. The emergency dialer activated. I didn't scream for help. I didn't cry out in pain. I just held the phone tight, letting the open line broadcast everything to the dispatcher on the other end. I wanted them to hear it all. The sound of Frank's heavy, labored breathing, the sound of my mother's choked, helpless sobs from the doorway, and the sound of my own defiant, resolute silence. That silence was my sworn testimony. It was my first official statement. In the distance, through the haze of pain, I thought I heard it. A faint siren, a hopeful wail in the dark, growing louder and louder. The battle wasn't over. It was just changing. I came to in a hospital room that smelled sharply of antiseptic, a dull, throbbing ache radiating from my left shoulder. The first thing I saw was a police officer sitting quietly in a chair beside my bed. She was a woman, maybe in her 40s, with a calm, steady presence. Officer Miller. She didn't bombard me with questions. She just poured me a cup of water from a plastic pitcher. When the police had arrived at my apartment, Frank had instantly transformed, playing the part of the concerned father, spinning a frantic story about how I was unstable and had injured myself in a fit of rage. Officer Miller looked at me, her expression kind but professional. "Your 911 call recorded everything, Captain," she said, her voice soft. "We heard his threats. We heard your mother crying, and we heard his final words to you." For the first time, someone believed me without me having to say a word. She looked at me for a moment longer. "This wasn't your fault," she added. "You were incredibly brave." Her words were a balm on a raw, open wound. When they brought my mother into the room, she completely fell apart. The sight of me, small and broken in the hospital bed, with my arm in a sling, shattered the terrified paralysis that had held her captive for 12 years. The dam broke. In a flood of tears and ragged breaths, she told Officer Miller everything. The financial control, the isolation, the verbal abuse, the veiled threats, and now, the physical violence. Her tearful confession, combined with the chilling audio from my 911 call, became the first rounds of ammunition in the war I was about to wage. The first person I called after the police left was Eric. I tried to keep my voice steady, to deliver the information like a battlefield report. Objective? Factual. Situation is contained. I'm stable. Need to coordinate next steps. But then my voice cracked, and the disciplined officer gave way to the terrified daughter, and I just broke down. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He just said, "I'm on the first flight to Boston. Don't do anything until I get there." His arrival a few hours later was like reinforcements arriving at a besieged outpost. He didn't treat me like a fragile victim. He treated me like a fellow officer facing a complex mission. He became my chief of staff, the calm center in my chaotic thoughts. He brought a legal pad and a pen, and together, we started mapping out a plan of action. He helped me contact the Judge Advocate General's Corps, the Army's legal arm, and found the name of the best civilian domestic violence lawyer in Boston. He turned my swirling vortex of pain and anger into a clear, actionable strategy. My new lawyer, a woman named Sharon Caldwell, was a petite, no-nonsense woman with eyes as sharp as shrapnel. In our first meeting, she laid out the battlefield with brutal honesty. "Kiana," she said, her voice crisp and direct, "Frank is a respected man with a lot of money and a team of expensive lawyers. Their first move will be to discredit you. They'll say you're an unstable soldier, that you have PTSD, that you were the aggressor. Our mission is to build an irrefutable profile of who he really is, based on facts, not emotion. She was right. So, we began to gather our intel. The soldier in me took over. I wrote a sworn statement detailing not just the assault, but every instance of control and psychological abuse I could remember, complete with dates, times, and specific quotes. It was a meticulous catalog of his reign of terror. Meanwhile, Mrs. Caldwell's team went to work, subpoenaing financial records. They uncovered a pattern of Frank systematically draining my mother's savings into his own accounts. As I worked, I thought of women like Gretchen Carlson, who had bravely stood up to a powerful, abusive man and changed the world. Her story fueled me. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for every person who had ever been silenced. But while the legal battle was ramping up, I had to face another front, one that was, in some ways, even more terrifying. The Army's Medical Evaluation Board. My injury was severe. A grade 3 shoulder separation with torn ligaments. It was a career-threatening injury. I had to sit before a panel of 3 senior officers, my left arm useless in a black immobilizer sling, and explain how I, a commissioned officer, had sustained such an injury. It was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. Admitting that I was overpowered in a domestic dispute felt like a deep, personal failure. It felt like a stain on my uniform, a betrayal of the strength I was supposed to embody. As I spoke, I could see the flicker of doubt in one of the officers' eyes. The unspoken question hung in the air. How could this happen to one of our own? I suppressed the shame. I pushed down the humiliation. I looked each of them directly in the eye and delivered my report with the same calm precision I would use to brief a mission. I detailed the events factually, without melodrama. Sir, this was an injury sustained while defending my home and my family from an aggressor, I stated, my voice clear and unwavering. It is a line-of-duty injury, and I will make a full recovery. I sat across from Mrs. Caldwell in her downtown Boston office, the city lights twinkling behind her. My left arm was still immobilized, a constant, dull ache radiating from my shoulder. But I sat perfectly straight, my spine aligned, my eyes locked on hers. The soldier who had been attacked was gone. In her place was an officer preparing for battle. The Suffolk County Superior Courthouse in Boston was cold and imposing, the air thick with a formal silence that felt heavier than gravity. Frank sat at the defendant's table, dressed in a tailored navy blue suit, looking more like a respected CEO about to chair a board meeting than a man on trial for aggravated assault. He was confident, even arrogant, flashing a reassuring smile at his high-priced lawyer. He was playing the part he'd perfected over a decade, the calm, rational man in control. When I was called to the witness stand, my left arm still in a sling, I could feel his stare like a physical weight, trying to intimidate me, trying to burn a hole right through me. His lawyer began his cross-examination exactly as Mrs. Caldwell had predicted. He painted a picture of me as an unstable, aggressive soldier, weaving a narrative where my military training and potential PTSD made me the true threat. He was attempting to turn my uniform, the very symbol of my honor and my escape, into a weapon against me. I took a deep, steadying breath, the words my father used to quote to me from the Bible echoing in my mind. The truth will set you free. And then, I began my testimony. I didn't tell my story as a victim. I delivered it like an after-action report. I stated the date, the time, the location. I gave a sequential account of the events. I described the de-escalation techniques I attempted to use, citing the specific training modules I had learned them from. I gave a clinical, precise description of the angle of the attack, the rotational force he used to dislocate my shoulder, the mechanics of the assault. My voice was calm, measured, and devoid of emotion. All the pain, the fear, the rage, it was all locked away. All that was left was the cold, hard, undeniable truth. When Frank's lawyer tried to interrupt, to twist my words, to paint my composure as cold-hearted detachment, I didn't engage with him. I simply turned my head slightly, looked directly at the 12 men and women in the jury box, and repeated the facts. I wasn't there to argue with him. I was there to present the truth to them. The very professionalism he was trying to use against me had become my most powerful weapon. I was a credible witness. I was an officer. And I was telling the truth. But the turning point of the trial didn't belong to me. It belonged to my mother. When Diane Huff was called to the stand, she looked small and fragile, shrinking into herself as she walked past Frank. He glared at her, leveling the same cold, menacing stare that had kept her silent for 12 years. For a terrifying second, watching her tremble under his gaze, I thought she was going to break. I thought the years of fear would win. But then she looked away from him, and her eyes found mine. She looked at me, and then her gaze dropped to my arm, still bound in its sling. And in that instant, something inside her shifted. A flicker of something new appeared in her eyes. The fear was still there, but it was being eclipsed by a quiet, simmering rage. She began to speak. Her voice was barely a whisper at first, but it grew stronger with every sentence, gathering a force that seemed to fill the entire courtroom. She told them everything. 12 years of fear, of being belittled, of being controlled, of hiding bruises with scarves and sunglasses. She dismantled the image of the perfect husband, the charming provider, brick by brick. She wasn't speaking as a victim anymore. She was speaking as a survivor. "My daughter is a hero," she said, her voice ringing with a conviction I had never heard from her before. "She has served this country in places most of us would be too afraid to even imagine. And she came home, to her own home, and was assaulted by the very man who should have been there to protect her." Frank's lawyer shot to his feet. "Objection! This is hearsay, pure emotional appeal." "Your Honor," Mrs. Caldwell said, her voice calm and clear. "Then let's hear from the defendant himself." She turned to the judge. "The prosecution would like to play the audio from the 911 call made by Captain Huff on the night of the assault." A heavy silence fell over the courtroom as the clerk fumbled with the audio equipment. Then, a click. And the sound of my apartment filled the room. First, Frank's ragged, heavy breathing, amplified by the speakers. Then, the sound of my mother's choked, terrified sobs from the doorway. The jury leaned forward, straining to listen. And then, clear as a bell, cold as the grave, came Frank's whispered, triumphant hiss. "See? You're nothing without that uniform. Just as weak as your father was." A collective gasp went through the gallery. It was a stunning, self-inflicted blow. The game was over. The jury didn't need to hear another word. They filed out, and less than 2 hours later, they filed back in. I held my breath as the foreman handed the verdict to the clerk. The clerk cleared his throat and read the single, powerful word that changed everything. Guilty. A wave of relief washed over me, so immense it almost buckled my knees. The judge's voice was a distant drone as he handed down the sentence. 15 years. But the word guilty echoed in the courtroom. In my head, over and over. I didn't feel the rush of victory I'd expected. I didn't feel elation or joy. I just felt empty. The war was over. The enemy was defeated. But the battlefield was my own life, and it was in ruins. When the judge's gavel came down and the sentence was read, there was no triumphant surge of joy, no feeling of vindication. There was only a vast, hollow emptiness. The war that had consumed every ounce of my energy and focus for months was finally over. The enemy had been vanquished. But the battlefield was littered with the wreckage of my life. My mother was sobbing beside me, a mixture of relief and a profound 12-year grief. Eric squeezed my hand, a solid, grounding presence in the swirling chaos. But inside me, there was only silence. The adrenaline that had fueled me for so long had vanished, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion that was both physical and spiritual. That night, back in my quiet apartment, I couldn't sleep. I just lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the shadows in the corners of the room feeling deeper than usual. The question echoed in the stillness. Now what? The battle was won. But peace? Peace felt a million miles away. A few months later, a letter arrived with a return address from a state penitentiary. It was from Frank. I let it sit on my kitchen counter for 3 days, a white paper ghost, before I finally found the courage to open it. The letter was exactly what I should have expected. There was no remorse, no apology, just pages of venomous, self-pitying blame. He wrote that I had ruined his life, that my mother was a traitor, that I was an ungrateful child who had thrown away everything he had ever given me. Even from behind bars, he was still the victim in his own story. Reading his words, I waited for the familiar surge of anger, the hot rush of indignation, but it never came. Instead, for the first time, I felt a strange, detached pity for him. He was a man so trapped in the prison of his own narcissism and hatred that he couldn't see the truth even when it was staring him in the face. He would serve his 15 years, but in his mind, he would be imprisoned for life. I took out a piece of plain white paper and a pen. I wrote a single sentence in reply. I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace. I folded the note, slid it into a drawer in my desk, and closed it. I never sent it. The forgiveness wasn't for him. It was for me. It was me taking my power back. Healing, I learned, isn't just an internal process. It's also about building fortifications. It's about securing your own perimeter. My mom and I started making the hard decisions together. We sold the big, beautiful house in Chestnut Hill, a place that held too many ghosts, too many painful memories in its silent, elegant rooms. My mom found a smaller, brighter apartment in a community with a book club and a walking group. And for the first time in over a decade, she started making friends again. Then came the fallout with the rest of the family. The phone calls from aunts and uncles who thought we had been too harsh, who told us we should have handled things privately. It was during this time that I started reading the works of Brené Brown, and her words became a lifeline. I learned that clear is kind, that setting boundaries isn't an act of aggression, it's an act of self-respect. So, I learned to say a simple but powerful phrase. I understand that's how you see it, but this is my boundary. I need you to respect it. Some of them did. Some of them didn't, and quietly faded out of our lives. And for the first time, my world and my mother's world began to be populated only by people who offered genuine love and support. It makes me wonder how many of us have had to make that difficult choice. The choice between keeping the peace and protecting our own. If you've ever had to set a hard boundary to save yourself, I hope you'll give this a like. And in the comments, if you feel comfortable, just write the word boundary. It's a powerful reminder for all of us that we have the right to draw that line. One Sunday afternoon, my mom came over to my apartment carrying a heavy cardboard box. Inside were the old family photo albums. We sat on the floor together, flipping through the glossy pages of my childhood. And there he was, on almost every page. Frank smiling his empty smile at a birthday party. Frank with his arm around my mother at Christmas. Frank playing the part of the perfect father. The photograph was a lie, and the lie was poisoning our past. What do we do with all of these? My mom asked, her voice quiet and sad. I looked at her, then at the smiling ghost in the photos. We rewrite our story, I said. So, that's what we did. We began carefully, gently, lifting each photo of him from its plastic sleeve. We weren't tearing them. We weren't burning them. We were simply removing him. It was a quiet, deliberate, and deeply cathartic act. And in the empty rectangular spaces he left behind, we began to place new pictures. A photo of me on graduation day from officer candidate school. A snapshot of Mom, beaming, standing at the rim of the Grand Canyon on her first solo trip in 15 years. We were curating our own history, clearing out the wreckage to make room for the future. We were making space for our own sunrise. 2 years have passed since the trial. My fears about my career being over, about being labeled as damaged goods by the institution I'd sacrificed so much for, proved to be unfounded. The Army didn't discard me. In a surprising turn of events, it invested in me. After months of intensive physical therapy, my shoulder healed, leaving a network of thin, silvery scars that served as a permanent reminder of that night. The medical evaluation board, after reviewing my case and my unwavering commitment to recover, ultimately cleared me for continued service. It was a victory in itself. With the Army's full support, I used my GI Bill to go back to school, attending night and weekend classes until I completed a master's degree in social work. Armed with a new set of skills, I formally submitted a request for a branch transfer. It was a significant shift, moving from the adrenaline-fueled, kinetic world of combat arms to the quiet, vital front lines of the Army's behavioral health services. Some of my old colleagues from my infantry days didn't get it. They saw it as a step down, a retreat from the glory of a command track that could lead to higher ranks and more prestige. "You're giving up the fight, Huff," one of them had told me over a beer. He was wrong. I knew that this was the most important battlefield I could ever serve on. My mission was no longer about fighting a visible enemy thousands of miles away. It was about learning to fight the invisible enemies that my fellow soldiers were battling right here at home. The crippling weight of depression, the silent chokehold of anxiety, and the deep, often hidden wounds inflicted not by enemy fire, but on the home front. I had found my true calling. I chose to become the leader, the resource, the listening ear I'd so desperately wished I'd had all those years ago. Which brings me to today. I'm Captain Kiana Huff, and I'm standing at a lectern in a sterile, fluorescent-lit classroom at Fort Hood, Texas. In front of me are 30 young non-commissioned officers and freshly minted lieutenants, their faces a mixture of earnestness and fatigue. The topic of today's mandatory training seminar is projected onto the screen behind me: Total Soldier Health, Identifying and Responding to a Home Front Crisis. I don't tell them my full story. They don't need to know the intimate, painful details of my past. This isn't about me. But I use its framework as an anonymous case study, a tactical lesson in recognizing the enemy within our own ranks. I teach them to see the red flags of abuse that go far beyond a visible bruise. I talk about the subtle, insidious signs. The soldier whose spouse demands access to all their passwords and social media accounts. The one who suddenly becomes isolated, making excuses to no longer spend time with their friends. The constant belittling comments disguised as just joking. I arm them with knowledge, pointing them to the resources that are available but often underutilized. The confidential counseling services, the legal aid, the family advocacy program. I am giving them the map that I once had to navigate blind, in the dark, and completely alone. After the training session ends, as the NCOs and officers are packing up their notebooks and filing out, one soldier lingers behind. She's a private first class, barely 20 years old, with wide, nervous eyes that remind me so much of myself at that age. She approaches my desk hesitantly, twisting her hands together. "Ma'am." "Captain Huff," she begins, her voice trembling so slightly I can barely hear it. "What you were saying about the financial control and the way he talks to her. It sounded a lot like my dad does with my mom." She doesn't have to say anything else. I see the years of fear and confusion reflected in her young face. I see the burden she's been carrying, the secret that's been eating her alive. My first instinct is to offer comfort, but I know that what she needs more than comfort is empowerment. I don't offer platitudes or easy answers. I simply meet her gaze, soldier to soldier, with the unwavering respect and understanding she deserves. I reach into my briefcase and pull out my official business card, the one with the direct 24-hour line to the on-base family support office. I slide it across the desk to her. "What you did today, Private, just by staying behind to talk to me. That was the bravest thing you could do," I say, my voice steady and calm. "You took the first step. That's the hardest one. And I want you to remember, you are not alone in this." As she walks away, clutching that small piece of cardstock like a lifeline, her shoulders looking just a little less slumped, a profound sense of peace settles over me. My mission is accomplished. The deepest, ugliest scar of my life had just become a lighthouse for someone else lost in the storm. A few months later, Eric and I are walking along the shore of Belton Lake as the Texas sun dips below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery shades of orange, pink, and purple. He's a major now, a promotion well-deserved, and his hand is warm and steady in mine. My phone buzzes with a text. It's a picture from my mom. She's standing on the edge of the Grand Canyon, her arms outstretched as if to embrace the vast, beautiful landscape, a smile on her face wider and more genuine than any I've seen in 20 years. She is free. Life isn't a fairy tale with a perfect ending. The scars on my shoulders still ache on cold, rainy nights. They are a permanent part of who I am. But I no longer look at them, or any of my other scars, with shame or regret. They are my reminders. They are the topography of a battle I fought and a war I won. I used to believe that strength meant never falling, never showing a crack in your armor. Now I know that's not true at all. Real strength is found in the aftermath. It's the courage to walk back onto the battlefield of your own life, to gather up all the shattered pieces and with patience and grace and love, assemble them into a beautiful and meaningful mosaic. It's not about waiting for the storm to pass. It's about creating your own sunrise, and that is how I learned to create my own sunrise. My story is now complete, but I know that for many of you, your own journey is ongoing. This channel is a place for stories like these, reminders that our scars do not define us, but our strength does. If my journey has moved you, please give it a like and hit that follow button so you don't miss the next story of survival and strength. And most importantly, if you know someone who might be sitting in the dark, waiting for their own sunrise, please share this with them. Thank you for listening. Remember, you are not alone.